Hello and welcome back to another episode of the For the Property Investor podcast. And we're here again with the weekly news that happens every week, funnily enough. And the only man that brings the news is Nick Bendel. Welcome back, Nick.
Thank you for having me, Owen.
My pleasure, my pleasure. What's been happening in your week this past week? Anything interesting, exciting?
Well, funny you should mention the word interesting. I own a business called Hunter and Scribe, which writes content for financial services professionals. And the people I speak to, they often ask me how they can possibly create interesting content because they believe that their industry is boring. But as I tell them, just because you're a broker or an accountant or a planner doesn't mean you can't create content that clients find interesting, Owen. And with that in mind, last week a website published a guest column of mine titled How to Write Interesting Content If You Work in the Boring Finance Industry. And I write interesting content for dozens of finance professionals around Australia, which is why I think it was such an apt column to contribute.
Who says finance is boring?
Well,
They must be boring.
I agree. I don't think it's boring, but a lot of people in the industry think that their industry is boring. And I have to reassure them that's not the case. And some of them are glad to be reassured, and some of them remain skeptical even after my reassurance.
Yes. No, there's nothing boring about finance at all. Yeah. And my cardigan for winter has been knitted as we speak.
Well, I'm glad you're excited. And how's your week been?
Yeah, pretty good, pretty good. We're preparing for end of month, which happens tomorrow, which happens every month about this time. So it's always a big deal for us. But expanding the team with a new staff member starting today as well. And we're talking to potential new business partners as well. I've always talked about the benefits to buyers agents, who we work with mostly, who are buying across the country with our national property management business. But we also work with a number of sales agents in their local area to help them grow a rent roll asset in their specific local area. So that's what I've been doing a bit this past week, speaking to a few sales agents who are owner operators of their own real estate sales business, but they're looking to add the extra income stream and the extra and an actual asset to their business by using our property management services. So yeah, that's been the past week.
I like that, because if you're a real estate agent and you're in the industry for 20, 30, 40 years and you got to retire, it's really, really hard to sell the sales side of the business, because even though real estate agents work in agencies, vendors often, in their mind at least, they feel as though they're hiring an individual agent. So it's very much about the individual. Whereas as a landlord, you often think that you're hiring the agency to manage your property. And therefore, a rent roll is so much more sellable than a real estate agent's database. So I think it's very smart of these real estate agents to speak to you to build up a rent roll that at some point they can sell when they want to exit the industry.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely 100% correct. So yeah, and that's what we provide for them. So yes, good to see a few more sales agents are going out on their own, starting their own business, and we can help them grow that asset without having to invest in office and staff and etc.
Well, I'm glad you help a lot of real estate agents, and I'd also like you to help Jim Chalmers if you could. With our first story, I'm going to ask you a few
Okay.
questions afterwards, and you can provide him with some important advice.
Okay, I'll see what I can do. I'll try.
Well, our first story today, budget delivers more debt and deficits. Treasurer Jim Chalmers has forecast years of deficits in his recent budget. After the Treasurer delivered a $15.8 billion surplus in the 2023-24 financial year, he said the next 5 years would bring a deficit of $27.6 billion in this 2024-25 financial year, a deficit of $42.1 billion in FY26, a deficit of $35.7 billion in FY27, a deficit of $37.2 billion in FY28, and a deficit of $36.9 billion in FY29. As a result, our gross debt is forecast to rise from $907 billion at the end of FY24 to $1.2 trillion by the end of FY29. So, Owen, in the budget, Jim Chalmers defended the government's handling of the economy by pointing to two main things. First, he said the budget was in a better position than forecasts before the 2022 election had predicted. And second, he said the global economy was in a difficult position. Based on that, do you think it's reasonable for our budget to be in deficit?
No, I don't think it is. It's successive governments. I mean, putting aside the COVID years where it really wasn't possible to make these types of changes, but yeah, the last 3 years have seen no real effective change to the tax system at all. We need to make some wholesale changes. It's been a quarter of a century since we've seen any significant changes to the tax system, and I think it's about time that we need to see more. Otherwise, we're going to have deficit after deficit. $1.2 trillion. That's huge. And yeah, we're averaging what 35 billion a year in budget deficits. It's just not sustainable. Yeah, we need to see some wholesale changes to the tax system, and yeah, we need to change it up. We're too reliant on personal income taxes, and which just hurts the individuals, and so individual taxpayers. So we need to make a lot of changes.
Since Rudd came in 2007, I guess there have been 17, 18 years since then, and we've only had two surpluses, both of them, it should be said, under Albanese. I mention that because both Liberal governments and Labor governments have been saying over the past 17, 18 years that the surplus is coming. It's just around the corner. We're on a path to surplus. We believe in surplus. We're going to create the surplus. But both sides, they've largely failed to deliver. So even though they talk a good game, their actions don't match their words. I mean, do you think we should be concerned that both sides of politics are more interested in spending than saving?
Well, yes, because spending gets you votes, and it's and making big, bold changes to this tax system scares people. So they and yeah, so politicians don't want to scare people because it might scare them away from voting for them again. But if we're going to make a dent in these budget deficits and actually look to getting back to surplus, or at least breaking even, geez, it's we need to make some structural changes to the whole tax system.
So what can we do to return our budget to surplus and pay off this $1 trillion worth of debt?
Yes, well, let's not even start on paying it off. Let's start on it, at least not increasing it. It's not as simple as just cutting spending or increasing taxes. It's probably changing the way that we are taxing and for different purposes. Yes, we can always look at spending, and there's always fat to cut in spending, especially in government. So we can always do things there, but it's changing the way we distribute a lot of the spending. A lot of it's done, especially in welfare and Medicare. Um, there's a lot of costs associated with doing that. So it's simplifying all of those areas and maybe simplifying the tax structure, restructuring a lot of it so that it's not so reliant on um, personal income taxes. And so there's many other ways that that can be done. And it's but someone's got to have the gumption to actually try and tackle it and do something different for a change.
So I'm wondering if one of the two leaders came out and said, we're in an economic hole, we're running all these deficits, our debt is climbing, we need to fix this problem sooner or later, and to do that we need to implement significant tax reform, and we need to restructure the economy, and we need to reduce spending, and there's going to be some pain, but it's going to lead to long-term gain. Do you think voters would respond positively or negatively to that sort of message?
I think it would be positive because it would be different to what we've been hearing for year after year, almost decade after decade now. And it's because it's been a quarter of a century since we had anyone that had the guts to do something like that. And but it needs to be done more and again. Um, where we've got an inefficient tax system between the states and the federal government. And so a lot of those taxes, especially the property taxes, are inefficient taxes, which are all state-based. You've got the federal government collecting tax, which it then distributes to the states. So why not clean a lot of that up? And then yes, our medical system, Medicare, is the cornerstone of our society almost, and our federal government. And we need to support that. I don't think we're going to have any government that will do anything to try and pull that apart. So we really need to stabilize that and build that value. So maybe some less income taxes, but some more focus on Medicare levy, or and more incentives, or some compulsory, somewhat compulsory need to have health insurance. In the 70s, before Medicare came in, pretty much everyone had health insurance. And it took a lot of the burden off the healthcare system. And now we see year after year, the health budget is just chewing up a bigger percentage of the federal budget. And not that that's necessarily a bad thing that we're doing for our country and society, but we need to make it sustainable. Otherwise, we can't spend any money on it, on anything else, if we're not collecting extra taxes to be able to pay for it.
Well, let's shift now from the economy to housing with our second story. Help to Buy now available to more buyers and more properties. The federal government has expanded the Help to Buy scheme in its recent budget. Once Help to Buy gets up and running, it will allow eligible buyers to enter the market with just a 2% deposit and to buy the property in tandem with the government, which will take a stake of up to 30% in an established home and up to 40% in a new home. To participate, your income can be no higher than $100,000 if you're an individual, which has increased from $90,000 in the budget, or $160,000 if you're a couple, which was increased from $140,000 in the budget. You're also restricted to buying properties under a certain value, and those price caps, which vary from location to location, were also increased in the budget to make it possible for Help to Buy participants to purchase more properties. Owen, what are your thoughts? Is Help to Buy a good idea?
I don't necessarily think it's a bad idea. It's the negatives are that in a time where we've got a lack of supply of housing, it will have an increasing effect on demand, which will help to push prices up. And so that 30 or 40% that the government is putting in, yes, that'll help a lot of these buyers leapfrog and get into the market sooner than they ever would have been able to. So it'll certainly help them from that point of view. And if that gives them stability long term in terms of housing, that's not a bad thing. But the only concern is in the short term, it's going to put um, more influence on the demand in the market, which can push prices up, which can make it worse for everyone else who doesn't qualify for these things. So, yeah, there's a lot of fine print in here, which we still need to find out about. But if someone's eligible for it and they can take advantage of it, yeah, go for it. But it's still the issue of whether it's creating more underlying demand when we don't have the supply to be able to meet it.
Well, if prices are too high in any market, it's because demand is too high and supply is too low. In the housing market, if there's an affordability concern, i.e. property prices are too high, as you say, it's because demand is too high and supply is too low. So with this scheme, it's increasing demand, it's not increasing supply. So I'm wondering, what do you think of the government's decision to increase the income caps and the property price caps for Help to Buy? Because presumably that will also increase demand.
Yes, it would. But as time goes past each year, property prices generally go up, and so do wages. And you need that increase to be able to get the borrowing capacity. They might have found that not enough people were quite taking it up. And to be able to make an impact, they needed to increase both of those caps. So it's not really surprising. And they're fairly modest increases as well. So I don't think it's anything um, to get too worried about.
Let's move on to our third and final story today. Coalition proposes mixed bag of housing policies. Opposition leader Peter Dutton has used his budget reply speech to put forward several different housing policies. If elected, Dutton said the coalition would cut the permanent migration program by 25% to, quote, free up housing and restore the great Australian dream of home ownership, ban foreign investors and temporary residents from purchasing existing homes for a period of 2 years, set stricter caps on foreign students to relieve stress on rental markets, invest $5 billion in essential infrastructure to get stalled housing projects up and running, and allow first home buyers to access up to $50,000 of their superannuation for a home deposit. Collectively, Owen, these policies would increase supply and reduce demand and also increase demand. So I'm wondering, what do you think, firstly, of the coalition's plan to cut the permanent migration program by 25% to reduce demand?
Yes, I think it's a good idea. I think each of these points are good ideas. It's part of the issue of that's put a lot of strain on both the rental market and the buying market is the increase in migration that we've seen over the last number of years, and since the Albanese government opened up the borders willy-nilly to let almost anyone in after COVID finished. And so it's cutting the immigration at this point is something that should be a must. With the only exception of bringing in skilled trades to help ease the pressure on the housing market so we can build more.
Okay, so reducing the migration intake is about reducing demand. What do you think of the coalition's plan to ban foreign investors and temporary residents from purchasing existing homes for a period of 2 years, which I guess is another measure aimed at reducing demand?
Yes, it is. It all helps. I mean, that's a politician throwing in an extra step to be able to win votes, but it's because there's not as many people buying. But even if it was only a 2% of the market, which it's probably even less than that, then it all helps.
And the good news is the coalition doesn't just have policies to reduce demand, it also has policies to increase demand. So what do you think of the coalition's plan to allow first home buyers to access up to $50,000 of their super for a property deposit?
I think that's actually a better idea than the current government's policy, as we were just talking about with the Help to Buy scheme, where the government is taking ownership. Why not let your super have an ownership? Your super gets all of the benefits of being an equity owner, and so it'll still get a return. It's not dead money, as some of the Labor Party's spokespeople have said. You know, they want to make sure it's invested in all their industry super funds buddies accounts, so it can be invested into infrastructure build so that their union buddies can get all that business and get all that work done in infrastructure. So we need to push. And another point here of one of the coalition's housing policies is to invest $5 billion in essential infrastructure to get stalled housing projects up and going. And yes, so we need those done as well. And instead of building huge amounts of infrastructure, which yes, we do need in the long term, but we've got a lot of trades working on these huge civil infrastructure builds that go for years and years when we need them to build houses. We've got the cost of houses increasing so much because of the shortage of trades. So putting all of that together, if you can invest in your own home using your super will get the long-term benefit. When you sell that property, it'll get the percentage gain. Your superannuation will get the percentage gain in that property back, as well as its $50,000, and it means that you can actually, in the earlier part of your life, actually get something out of your super that you feel like is worthwhile.
Okay, so from an investment perspective, I think it makes sense. A leveraged investment in property may very well deliver a higher long-term return than an unleveraged investment in shares.
Mm.
But if the coalition is saying we need to reduce demand, it seems like this policy doesn't make sense, because isn't this just going to increase demand?
Well, yes, but we need a balance of both. We still need to help people to be able to get into their property sooner, and to help them save up that deposit. And if we were just comparing policies between the current government with their Help to Buy scheme and the coalition's policy of using super, then the better one for the individuals is using super.
I don't. Now, I could be wrong, but I haven't heard the coalition saying they would get rid of Help to Buy. which raises the possibility of a first home buyer using $50,000 from their super as a 2% deposit on a help to buy property, combining the two schemes and getting into the market that way.
Yes, I would be certain that one would probably disqualify the other. And yes, because using the 50,000 out of your super as the 2%, yeah, it's it might not all add up. So there might be an issue there. So yeah, it's of course the devil's in the detail that we need to find out. And yes, but I think this plan of the coalition has got, if it's fully executed properly, it it will actually start getting some movement happening, and it will also help in the broader market, and it will also help the individual as well who is wanting to get into their first home.
And just before we finish up, we've got an election in about a month's time. I think we should put our predictions on the record, and maybe we'll do this every week before the election. So right now, what do you think the election result will be?
I think it'll be a hung parliament. We'll have a minority government. On which side? Yeah, I think it's too early to tell.
So gutless. Well, I'm going to make a prediction. I also think it'll be a minority government, and I think Dutton will be Prime Minister.
Okay. All right. Well, considering the housing policies and for our listeners in our market, then I definitely hope you're right.
Well, Owen, great to chat. I look forward to speaking again next week, and hopefully you'll grow a spine in between now and then.
Thanks, Nick. Jeez, I won't take that personally. All right, we'll see you next week, and thank you for listening. See you then, Nick.